Hello everyone. So today we will discuss about the pons. The objectives are to learn about the pons under following headings: the relations, external features, internal features, blood supply and the clinical anatomy. The pons means bridge. So it is the middle part of the brainstem that will be connecting the midbrain with the medulla oblongata. So it is related anteriorly to the clivus, separated by the basilar artery. Laterally it is related to the middle cerebellar peduncle. So the pons is a part of metencephalon, measures about 2.5 centimeter long, and it extends from the cranial end of the medulla oblongata to the cerebral peduncles of the brain. Posteriorly it is related to the fourth ventricle. So surfaces, it is having the ventral surface which is convex and transversely striated. There is a vertical basilar sulcus present in the median plane. The basilar artery is situated in this sulcus. Laterally it is continuous with the middle cerebellar peduncle. So in this surface there is a presence of the trigeminal nerve at the junction of pons with the peduncle. The nerve has two roots. The sensory root is larger and the motor root is smaller, and it is situated medial to the sensory root. So in the ventral surface we can observe the fifth cranial nerve, that is trigeminal, sixth nerve, that is abducent, the seventh nerve, the facial, and the eighth nerve, vestibulocochlear. The dorsal surface is hidden by the cerebellum and it forms the upper half of the fourth ventricle. So in this picture we can observe the floor of fourth ventricle. The upper part is contributed by the dorsal surface of the pons. So the pons is having two borders, the superior border where there is a crus cerebri, and the third nerve, the oculomotor, and the fourth nerve, the trochlear nerve, is seen in this border. The inferior border lies at the junction of pons and medulla. So here again the sixth, seventh and eighth cranial nerve is attached, that is the abducent, facial and the vestibulocochlear nerve. So the transverse section of the pons, to see the internal features, can be done at two levels: the vertebral or the basilar part and the dorsal or the tegmental part. So the ventral or the basilar part, it continues inferiorly with the pyramids of the medulla oblongata. On each side it is continuous with the cerebellum through the middle cerebellar peduncle. The dorsal or the tegmental part, here there is a direct continuation of medulla oblongata excluding the pyramids. So now we see, we will observe the grey matter and the white matter at each level. First, in the basilar part, it is having a uniform structure throughout its length. So the grey matter in the basilar part is represented by the pontine nuclei, so that are scattered in between the longitudinal and transverse fibers. So here we can observe the dot like structures which represents the pontine nucleus. They are scattered among the longitudinal and the transverse fibers. So the pontine nuclei form an important part of cortico-pontocerebellar pathway. So, some of them are displaced during development and form the arcate nucleus and the pontobulbar body. The white matter in this region, that is in the basilar part, consists of longitudinal and transverse fibers. The longitudinal fibers includes the corticospinal and the corticonuclear tracts, that is the pyramidal tracts, and the corticopontine fibers ending in the pontine nuclei. So, the transverse fibers or the pontocerebellar fibers beginning from the pontine nuclei and going to the opposite half of the cerebellum through the middle cerebellar peduncle. So, tegmental part, the tegmental part can be studied under two levels, that is at the lower level and at the upper level. So, at the lower level, that is at the level of facial colliculus, the grey matter includes the abducent nucleus that lies beneath the facial colliculus. So, the elevation just below the elevation, that is the facial colliculus. So, we can observe the abducent nucleus. Then the seventh nerve nucleus, that is the facial nerve nucleus, lies in the reticular formation of the pons. The vestibular nucleus and the cochlear nucleus, they lie in the area close to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So, the vestibular nuclei lie deep to the vestibular area in the floor of the fourth ventricle, partly in the medulla and partly in the pons. So, they are divisible into four parts: superior, inferior, medial and lateral. So, they receive the fibers of the vestibular nerve and give the efferents to the cerebellum, the medial longitudinal bundle and the spinal cord and the lateral lemniscus. So, the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei, so we can observe here it is present in the dorsal and the ventral aspect of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. They receive the fibers of the cochlear nerve and give efferents mostly to the superior olivary nucleus and to the nuclei of the corpus trapezoidum and the nuclei of lateral lemniscus. So, these fibers form the trapezoid body. The other grey matter, the other nucleus in the grey matter includes the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve and its nucleus in the lateral part, and the superior salivary nucleus and the lacrimatory nuclei. So, here we can make out the lacrimatory, only the superior salivary nucleus we can make out here. So, the white matter at the level of facial colliculus includes the trapezoid body. It is a transverse band of fibers lying just behind the ventral part of the pons. It consists of the fibers that arise in the cochlear nuclei of both the sides. The medial lemniscus forms the transverse band on either side of the midline just behind the trapezoid body. Here we can observe the trapezoid body just above the ventral aspect, and just behind that the medial lemniscus is present. Then the spinal lemniscus, that is the lateral spinothalamic tract, lies lateral to the medial lemniscus, and the trigeminal lemniscus present more laterally. The inferior cerebellar peduncle lies lateral to the fourth ventricle. So, here we can observe the fibers of the facial nerve follow a peculiar course. It is not the straight, they forms a loops around the abducent nucleus. So, after forming the loop, then it continues down as the facial nerve. So, this loop is responsible for the elevation called the facial colliculus. So, this facial colliculus we can see in the floor of the fourth ventricle. So, next the tegmental part at the level of motor and sensory nucleus of trigeminal, that is in the upper part of the pons. So, the grey matter includes the motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve and the superior sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. So, the motor nucleus is medial to the superior sensory nucleus. Then the white matter at this level includes the medial lemniscus. So, here we can see the medial lemniscus, that is made up of the transverse band of fibers from medial to lateral side. We are having the medial lemniscus, then trigeminal lemniscus, then the spinal lemniscus and the lateral lemniscus. So, these are all the transverse band of fibers. So, from the medial to lateral side we can observe MTSL, that is the medial lemniscus, trigeminal lemniscus, spinal lemniscus and the lateral lemniscus. So, the trigeminal lemniscus contains the fibers arising in the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve and travelling to the thalamus. The lateral lemniscus is part of the auditory pathway. The fibers arising in the nuclei lying close relation to the trapezoid body. So, here in the lateral lemniscus, it consists of the fibers arising in the nuclei lying in relation to the trapezoid body. The superior cerebellar peduncles lie dorsolateral to the fourth ventricle. So, here we can observe the cavity like structure that represents the fourth ventricle. So, the superior cerebellar peduncle is lying just dorsolateral to the fourth ventricle. The medial longitudinal bundle is made up of fibers that interconnect the nuclei of the cranial nerves 3rd, 4th, 6th and 8th and the spinal part of the accessory nerve. It coordinates the movements of the head and neck in response to stimulation of the cranial nerve 8, that is the vestibulocochlear nerve. So, to summarize the internal structure, so the internal structure of the pons can be studied under basilar part and the dorsal part. Again in the dorsal part at the lower level and at the upper level. So, in the basilar part we are having the grey matter and the white matter. The grey matter consists of the pontine nucleus, the white matter consists of corticospinal and corticonuclear fibers, corticopontine fibers, pontocerebellar fibers. In the dorsal part, the upper aspect, the grey matter and white matter. The grey matter consists of the motor and sensory nuclei of trigeminal nerve. The white matter includes the medial lemniscus, trigeminal lemniscus, spinal lemniscus, lateral lemniscus and the superior cerebellar peduncle. The dorsal part in the lower aspect, the grey matter and the white matter. In the grey matter we are having the 6th nerve, that is abducent, the 7th the facial nerve and the 8th vestibulocochlear nerve nuclei, the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve and the superior salivatory nucleus and the lacrimatory nucleus. The white matter includes the trapezoid body, the medial lemniscus, spinal lemniscus, trigeminal lemniscus and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So, when we observe the dorsal part, that is upper aspect and the lower aspect, in the upper part the grey matter consists of motor and the sensory nuclei of trigeminal nerve, whereas in the lower part we are having the 6th, 7th and 8th nerve nuclei, spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, superior salivatory nucleus and the lacrimatory nucleus. The white matter in the lower part consists of trapezoid body, The medial lemniscus is seen in the lower part as well as in the upper part. The spinal lemniscus, the trigeminal lemniscus is also present in the lower and the upper part. The lateral lemniscus in the upper part, and the inferior cerebellar peduncle is seen in the lower part, whereas the superior cerebellar peduncle is seen in the upper part. So, these are the differences between the upper aspect and the lower aspect of the dorsal or the tegmental part of the pons. The blood supply of the pons is by pontine arteries. The functions of the pons includes it connects the medulla and the midbrain, and it transmits the information between the spinal cord and the higher brain regions via the neural circuits, and relay motor information between cerebral cortex and the cerebellum. Now, the Cerebellopontine angle. So, as the name indicates, this is the structure at the margin of the cerebellum and the pons. So, the area of the cisternal lateral cistern containing the cerebrospinal fluid, arachnoid tissue, cranial nerves and associate vessels. So, here in another angle we can observe the Cerebellopontine angle. The contents of this area includes the facial nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve, flocculus of the cerebellum and the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle. Coming to the clinical anatomy, Cerebellopontine syndrome. So, here the structures present in this angle, if they are damaged, and they shows the symptoms according to the involvement of the structures. So, if there is an involvement of 8th nerve, that is the vestibulocochlear nerve, there will be persistent tinnitus, the progressive deafness, the nystagmus, nausea and vomiting and the vertigo. The involvement of the cerebellar lesion, the ipsilateral cerebellar signs, tremors and ataxia. The involvement of the facial nerve gives rise to ipsilateral palsy, hyperosseous, loss of taste. The spinal trigeminal nucleus and tract involvement gives rise to ipsilateral loss of pain and temperature sensation from the face. So, now the Pontine hemorrhage. The bilateral paralysis of the face and limbs due to involvement of the 7th or the facial nerve nucleus and all the corticospinal fibers. So, there will be deep coma due to damage to the reticular formation, hyperpyrexia due to cutting off of the temperature regulating fibers from the hypothalamus, the pinpoint pupil due to damage to sympathetic ocular fibers, the Millard-Gueblar syndrome. There will be damage to the fibers of the 6th and 7th nerves along with the pyramidal fibers. There will be occlusion of paramedian branches of basilar artery. So, the 7th nerve involvement gives rise to the ipsilateral Bell's palsy, the hyperosseous, loss of taste, and the pyramidal tract involvement gives rise to contralateral hemiplegia. So, the questions for assignment: the pontine nuclei, location and connections, sections of pons at mid level, the transverse section of pons at the level of facial colliculus. Thank you.